Hey, yo, what's good? So, if my calculations are correct, this should be uploaded on October 21st, 2015, the day when Marty and Doc come back to the future. So now I'm just gonna quickly run through the entire history of Back to the Future in fiction. I'm just gonna pretty much wrap it all up. That includes movies and the game. So if you don't want spoilers, then, well, obviously then you shouldn't be watching this video right now. But anyway, so, first time that the DeLorean was ever thought of was November 5th, 1955. When a not-so-young man named Dr. Emmett Brown was hanging a clock while standing on a toilet, and then he slipped, and then he hit his head on the edge of a sink, and then he had a vision of a Y shape.
This is what makes time travel possible. The flux capacitor.
Over the next 30 years, Doc invented a time machine out of the flux capacitor. Took a form of a car, and if it went at 88 miles an hour, when the time circuits were in place, and if it had plutonium, then it would travel through time. When Dr. Emmett Brown was about to set it off in the middle of the night for a first test run 1 minute into the future, he called his friend Marty McFly to come over and film the test for him. His experiment was on a dog, and it was an amazing success.
Disintegrated Einstein.
Then unfortunately something happened. It was nothing big. So Marty jumped into the car, or DeLorian is the type of car, and accidentally took 30 years into the past when Dr. Emmett Brown had just pictured the Y shape. Then a whole bunch of crazy stuff happened, and he accidentally prevented his parents from getting together and being born and blah blah blah. And the car didn't have any plutonium to go. So to make a long story short, Marty found the young Dr. Emmett Brown from 1955. Bada bing, had him fix it at 1.21 gigawatts, and then they got back together, and he went back to the future, and then a whole bunch of crazy stuff happened, and then he stopped stuff, and then Doc's still alive, went to 2015, then came back, and that's the first movie. The DeLorean arrived back in 1985. Well, Marty actually sent it to arrive a couple minutes before it actually left so that he could have a chance to save Doc. And it didn't happen the way that he expected, but Doc didn't die. And then Doc left in the DeLorean to explore the future in the year 2015, this year, and left Marty by himself to figure out how much his timeline has changed now that he's been back to 1955. His life has changed much for the better. Doc found some information about Marty's future family ending up in jail, so Doc quickly took the DeLorean back to 1985 to pick up Marty, and was forced to pick up Jennifer as well, who was happening to stand there, and he couldn't leave her there without information. So they all took off back to the year 2015, and then Doc made sure to take off really quickly just before the timeline got erased from existence, because technically, now that Doc came back to 1985 and is taking Marty and Jennifer back to 2015, that means that they should be entering a universe where Marty and Jennifer all of a sudden disappeared. Therefore, Marty's future family wouldn't have existed. So he tried to do it as soon as possible, just before the timeline got erased from existence. Then they fixed some stuff, blah blah blah. But unknown to any of them, oh, I should mention that the DeLorean got a hover conversion, too, because the future is now.
Our laces, all right. This thing doesn't fit.
Size adjusting. Fit.
Pull out your pants pockets. All kids in the future wear their pants inside out.
Drying mode on. Check drying. Your jacket is now dry.
Hey, kitty.
Kid, some $100, will you, and help save the clock tower?
And Biff, who was actually a bully in 1955, but after Marty altered time in 1955, it turned out for him to be a little bit of a, you know. And now that he's in the year 2015, he's an old man, but he realizes that he can make a comeback. So as soon as he hears about the time machine, he quickly takes off the second that he has the chance, and then learns how to time travel on his own, and goes back to 1955 with an almanac of all the winners of sports from 1950 to 2000. And then he gave the almanac to his past self, so that his past self could say the predictions of the winners ahead of time, and therefore win on all of the betting and gambling and stuff, therefore making him a really rich man. Old Biff left in the DeLorean back to 2015, just in time, just before it got erased from existence. However, when Marty and Doc went back to 1985, they got a big surprise.
I remember bars being on these windows. Hey, wait a minute. What are you doing in my room? Wait a minute. Okay.
Freeze!
Hey, it's okay. I don't want any trouble.
Oh, you got trouble now, you piece of shit! What are you doing in here with my daughter?
Hey, listen, I'm just in the wrong house.
You got that right, you know.
Hey, look, I made a mistake.
Damn right you made a mistake. Right, you keep running, sucker. And you tell that realty company that I ain't selling you here. We ain't gonna be terrorized.
Marty McFly, don't you know me, sir, from school, sir?
I've never seen you before in my life, but you look to me like a slacker.
Yeah, that's right, I am a slacker. Don't you remember you gave me detention last week?
Last week, the school burnt down 6 years ago. Now you gotta...
After they soon realized what Biff has done after looking at newspaper clippings and pretty much everything possible that they could find in that altered 1985, they managed to figure out that Biff must have stolen the time machine and took it back to a certain point in the past, blah blah blah. So, Marty sneaks into current Biff's house and tricks him, well, not really trick him, but gets him to tell him when and where and how he got the almanac. And then once Marty had the knowledge, Doc quickly grabbed him just before Biff was about to shoot him, and they quickly took back to 1955. They were very careful not to run into their past selves, because Doc had his past self from 1955, and Marty had his past self in 1955, who is currently altering the timeline, and is going to come back to 1985 soon enough. So, they kind of worked like a ninja.
Doc, come in, Doc. This is Marty, over.
And eventually managed to put the timeline back to how it should be. However, Dr. Ant Brown was unfortunately flying in the sky and was about to pick Marty up when all of a sudden he got zapped by his lightning. As well as plutonium, which has now been replaced by garbage after Doc went to the future. He changed so that the DeLorean wouldn't run on very rare plutonium, but very common garbage. And you can also charge it by having 1.21 gigawatts into the time machine. Doc was struck by lightning. Lightning is just enough electricity for 1.21 gigawatts, sending him back to 1885, as the time circuits were a bit wonky. And then, well, the DeLorean wasn't actually going at 88 miles per hour once it finally traveled through time. However, still had 1.21 gigawatts, and the time circuits were punched in. So what exactly happened was, the DeLorean as well as Doc in it went back in time to 1885. But since it was moving at 88 miles per hour, it causes a second empty DeLorean to be shot by the same amount of time into the opposite direction of time. Okay. So, if it was going into the past, the duplicate would go into the future. If it was going into the future, it would go into the past. So the DeLorean got zapped into the past to 1885, 70 years into the past. So another DeLorean got sent into the future, 70 years into the future, to the year 2025. Though technically, if you add up the months and the days and the hours and the minutes that traveled through time, then technically it should have been sent to 2026. Never mind. So, yeah. What happened to that other DeLorean? I'll have to tell you later. But for now, let's focus on the DeLorean that sent Doc back in time. Doc decided to have a life in 1885. He wrote a letter and sent it to the post office and gave them direct instructions to deliver it to the exact point where Marty would be standing at the exact minute when the past DeLorean was traveling through time. Therefore, Marty would receive the letter just as he saw Doc and the DeLorean travel through time. So, he specifically said in the letter that Marty was not going to go back in time to get him. Why? Because he was perfectly happy in that. So, he left the DeLorean inside a cave and let it rot away inside there. He mentioned in the letter that Marty was to go get his 1955 self and ask him for help. He put it in the letter that he hid it in a cave and told them which cave and where. And soon, back in 1955, Marty received the letter just as he saw Doc got zapped. And he did as he was told. He grabbed past, or should I say future, well, an earlier version of Doc, and convinced him that this wasn't a prank, he was indeed from the future. And this version of the Doc got a lot more information about his future than the other Doc. But the point is, young Doc helped Marty, and soon they recovered the DeLorean. That's the second movie. Third movie. Marty goes back in the DeLorean to the year 1885. Yes, even though Doc told him not to come and rescue him. Why? Because they recovered some information that Doc actually died in 1885 just after he sent the letter. Therefore, he couldn't send a letter again to say that he died and that he wants to come back because he was dead. So anyway, Marty goes back to 1885 and tries to rescue Doc. But unfortunately, he falls in love with a woman named Clara there. Marty saves him from dying, though. And soon, the DeLorean is sent back to 1885. However, it ran out of gasoline, and there was no gasoline in 1885. However, you must remember, it doesn't need to be going on gasoline. It just needs to be going at 88 miles per hour. So they touched on the time circuits, added in some garbage, and had a train push it up to 88 miles per hour to get to time travel. Whoopee! So Marty was happy to see his timeline restored. And meanwhile, Doc, back in 1885, created a second time machine, a time train, and used it to travel to, I don't know, it probably wasn't 2015, because hover conversion to a car is one thing. Hover conversion to a train is probably another thing. So it probably went to like 2045 or something, and then got a new hover conversion. He then went back in time to recover his dog Einstein, and then traveled back or forward in time to meet Marty and say goodbye to him and say that he's quite happy and he can travel through time now. That's the third movie. Moving on to our precious game. Okay, I'm gonna kind of stop spoiling the story and just focus on the time machines now. So Doc would continue to travel in his time train to whatever throughout the time of the fourth dimension. And on one of his trips, he went to the year 2025, where he recovered that second empty DeLorean. So now he had two time machines. And somehow he got them both back to 1885 or something. And then he added something to the second DeLorean, a feature that if Doc or pretty much no one would return to the DeLorean within a certain amount of time, the DeLorean would consider it that Doc is in danger and would go straight to 1986, just to give Marty kind of a breather of what's been going on. And it would go to 1986, which Marty would recover it, and he also put a videotape in there that would say exactly how it worked and all that. So one time Doc was exploring 1931 and he accidentally got killed, and therefore no one was really returning to the DeLorean, except for Einstein, who just happened to be in the DeLorean as soon as the DeLorean went to 1986, in which Marty recovered it, listened to the tape, followed the trail of signs, and then took the DeLorean back to 1931 once he knew where to go, and then he rescued him. And then that's literally it for part 1. Part 2 of 5. Marty sees himself getting erased from existence because his grandfather just got killed, so he quickly gets into the DeLorean and is about to go with Doc, but then some stuff happens with the police, so Doc is forced to stay, and Marty quickly runs away in the DeLorean 6 hours into the past to alter time and stop his grandfather from dying, blah blah blah. However, since Marty did that, it changed history, so when Doc and Marty got back to the present, it was changed for the worse. So they went back to 1931 once again to change that. Unfortunately, once again, they managed to fix that timeline, but not without changing it again. So Marty and Doc took the time machine back to 1986, but since Doc was completely different in this timeline, Doc immediately got erased from existence as soon as they arrived, and Marty was teleported to the alternate 1986 and crashed into a billboard. Surprisingly, in part 3 of 5, the DeLorean never time traveled. It's purely on Marty trying to convince the Doc from that certain timeline that it's not the correct timeline and he needs the time machine fixed. But the DeLorean, or any other time machine, doesn't do a single trip in part 3 of Back to the Future the game. However, in part 4, that's when Marty is continuing to try and convince Doc, and then when he finally does, Doc fixes the time machine. However, he knows that once he's convinced that he needs to fix the timeline, he realizes that it's going to take about 6 months to do it, so he tells Marty to stay away from the roads, and then he rushes home to fix the DeLorean. And then once he fixes it, 6 months later, he then travels back in time 6 months, just a couple seconds. Sorry, that's the dog. Just a couple seconds after he ran away and told Marty to stay away from the roads. However, the DeLorean malfunctioned and actually brought him a couple minutes after. They went back in time to 1931 to fix the timeline, only to be a couple months off. That's when they realized that soon they're going to end up being years off because something's wrong with the time circuits. So they try to fix the timeline, but unfortunately Doc seems to betray Marty once he finds out that, compared to him, the original timeline might not be so good. And finally, in part 5, Doc tries to get with sort of a girl that I liked in 1931 named Edna, and she was basically the bad guy in that alternate 1986, so he tried to convince her about the time machine and convinced her to change her ways for good. However, Edna wouldn't listen, so she quickly jumped into the DeLorean and just time traveled to a random date, specifically 1876, I think it was, and he ended up burning down the entire Hill Valley. However, before the ripple effect occurred in 1931, Marty was successful in changing young Doc to fix the timeline completely. Therefore, the Doc from the alternate timeline got erased from existence, and somehow that prevented Doc from ever getting arrested and stuff. So basically, the Doc they've been traveling in episodes 1 and 2 actually never existed. So Doc goes back to 1931 with the DeLorean because of some timey-wimey stuff that Marty did with his younger self. So now there's 2 DeLoreans, a DeLorean that Edna has that went through the entire game, and the DeLorean that Doc has that we never saw. So Then that's when the ripple effect occurs, and then in 1931 just everything disappears because Hill Valley just got completely burned down. Once Doc and Marty realize this, they go back in time to 1876 and prevent Hill Valley from being burned down, and they manage to get Edna back to her own time. And then, of course, the DeLorean that she was driving now never actually existed. The DeLorean that we've been traveling throughout this entire game gets erased from existence. Or I think it was like that. I don't really know. Doc said something about the timeline catching up with it. But anyway, so once that was fixed, Doc and Marty went back to the future, well, 1986, the present, in their DeLorean, and they found out that the timeline was once changed again. But this time not for the worse. Just like at the end of Back to the Future, the movie part 1, it was changed yet again for the better. All of a sudden, as that happens, this happens.
Doc,
Marty, what are you doing here?
you gotta come with me. Back to the future.
Marty, you can't be here. If your younger self sees you, the consequences could be catastrophic.
My younger self? Oh, right. Bring him along too. This concerns all of us.
What do you mean? Does something happen to us?
Do we turn into assholes or something?
Nah, we're fine. But our great-great-grandkids?
What the hell?
Great Scott.
Doc, you gotta come back with me. Don't listen to him, Doc. It's me you gotta help. If you want to save Jennifer and our 12 kids. What? That timeline was overwritten 5 jumps back.
Doc,
Jennifer's out of
how
the
can there be two more of me here?
I have no idea. My own rights of space-time continuum should be tearing apart like a cheap dish rag right now.
It already is. What my evil twin and I are trying to say is the future is totally jacked up, and you gotta come with me to save it. No, me. So, we meet at last. You've altered my timeline once too often.
What's going on, Doc?
Well, we do seem to have a conundrum on our hands. Or 3.
Yeah, Doc, but which one is the real me?
Isn't it obvious, Marty? Come on.
And that's it. That's all that we got. Will there be a season 2 of Back to the Future the game? I hope so, but so far there's been nothing. So I guess, happy Back to the Future Day, everyone. I guess I'll see you later. Come, you gotta come back with me. What do you mean back? Back where? Back to the future, obviously. What do you mean, to what year? Yeah, it's the year 2025. It gets kind of complicated. You see, yeah, you just gotta come. Okay, hold on to me. Hope you enjoyed that. I will see you not this weekend, but next weekend. Subscribe, like, comment, you know what to do. And, no copyright intended for the brief clips of the movies that I used. Bye-bye. Then Marty quickly jumped into the car, or DeLorian is the type of the car, and accidentally took it 30 years back in time, to the time when Dr. Brown had just recently